What's up, family? Thank you so much for joining me again today. I really hope that you guys are having a fantastic fall. Some people really love the fall weather. I'm more of a summer guy. I mean, honestly, I don't like crazy hot weather, but I do like my summer moments. But the fall means that we get to get a little bit cozier sometimes, get some sweaters on. And for people like me, it's all about from now until June, it's a waiting time, right? But let me start off this week by telling you a little bit of a story. So back in 2015, my oldest daughter, she was 15 at the time, turning 16 at the time, and she had the opportunity that one of her cousins was planning a trip with a group to go down to a missions trip down to Mexico. And they were going to go down to Mexico to an orphanage that the church there was sponsoring. And they had the opportunity to help and rebuild this orphanage and do some maintenance and play with the kids and just do some amazing fun things. So there was a group of, I think it was about 18 kids that were going down there, and they were going to drive down there. So they were asking for any parents or volunteers that were willing to drive this group of teenagers down to Mexico so that they can do some work in an orphanage. So my wife's like, Jason, you got to do this. This is a great opportunity to spend with your kids and go down there and just enjoy yourself. So I was like, all right, not a problem. You know what? That sounds good. I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the couple of weeks off of work, and I'm going to drive down there with them. I got my class 4 so I could drive down there and drive a van with all the kids down there. And we're like, okay, the drive from Victoria, we actually left from Vancouver down to Mexico. I believe it took us about 4 days down there, 3 days, 3 days down there, 4 days back. We had an extra day to a little bit relax kind of thing when we were down there. But I was like, I was absolutely dreading this. But I knew that when we got down to Mexico, I'd create some amazing memories, times that you just couldn't even imagine, right? So I was like, hey, I'm going down there. I'm creating memories with my daughter, right? This is my oldest child. This is, at this time I was thinking, man, she's getting older. She's only gonna be in the house for a couple more years. So this is my opportunity to create some memories with her down there, doing something great and helping kids. So I was like, okay, forget about the drive, because 3 days of driving straight with vans full of kids and whatnot, didn't sound like fun. It was like, all right, well, I got to get through that to get down there, to get to Mexico, to get to what it's really about. So we drove down there, and honestly, the time that we had down there was amazing. We met some amazing kids. We were able to fix up some of the dormitories in this orphanage, and we had a fantastic time. And I do have fantastic memories and great memories of the time that we spent down there, and that time with just my daughter and I. But when I came back, honestly, the thing that I was most excited about, and the thing that even to this day I remember the most, was the drive. The thing that I was dreading, I'm like, man, this is just what I have to do to get down there, to actually get to the goal. But it ended up being some of the greatest memories of my life. Driving down there with this van full of kids. There was 3 different vans, and the kids would kind of rotate through the vans as we'd stop. But just to get down there and the trip down there with these kids, and the nights that we spend, and the songs that we would sing, and we'd come back, and I mean, of course, as with anyone who was on a trip, that you have those little nuances that only you and the person know about, and you come back and it was like, well, what are you talking about? And we're like, hey, remember that? Or you sing a certain song, and you look over at each other, and you both know that, I remember that song. But these are the things that I remembered the most. It was the trip down there, the thing that I was dreading, the thing that I was like, okay, I have to do this to get to my end goal, to get to what I really actually want to do, the thing that I feel like I was called to do, go down and help Mexico. This was a necessary thing that had to be done. But in the end, that was one of the things that I have the most memories of and that I found to be absolutely amazing. Now, in our Christian walk, in our lives, we have these things, and when you've been in the church for a while, I mean, sometimes people are like, oh, you know what, you have a call in your life, and, this great thing is going to happen in your life. Or you read the Bible and you feel like, as you're praying, and you really feel like God's saying, this is something I have for you. This is what I have in store for you. These are some of the miracles that I have in store for you. And when I look back in my life, there's these things these moment to moment, these big things in my life that I'm like, God, wow, you did this. Right? These big, amazing miracles where, he fed us when we didn't have any food, when we didn't have the money for Christmas. God gave us the food and the money that we needed for Christmas, right? These big miracles, it's like, God, you gave us a house. Right? We have all these big things that we look back on, and then we look forward and go, okay, God, you've made these promises that you're going to do amazing things in our lives and in our church. And we're always just waiting. We're waiting for that next big thing that God's going to do. That next big miracle. The Bible's full of these big miracles that God does. And we're waiting like, God, what's the next big miracle that you're going to bring? But sometimes it's not just about that big miracle. And that's kind of why I love our Bible, and I love the Bible especially in the Old Testament as you're reading through it, that it tells you about these great things that God did, these big miracles that God did, and you can see the way that God worked in people's lives. But the Bible just doesn't tell us about these big miracles as some other people's books and faith tell them about these big things that they believe that happened for them, but the Bible tells us about the in-between, about the things that went on in between these miracles, the things that went on when something big happened, but then guess what? There was years in between what happened the next one. And the Bible's not just telling us about that, right? Because it wants us to realize that we're living in the in-between most of the time. God is going to do absolutely everything that he said that he's going to do. God is doing miracles day in and day out, but in our lives, he's saying, yes, I've called you to this, or yes, I have this miracle coming. But guess what? You're in the in-between. And sometimes we need to learn to just live in the in-between and appreciate the things that are happening in the in-between. Now, when we're living in the in-between, I mean, there's different kinds of things that can happen in the in-between for us before God does, another one of his big miracles that we look back and go, wow, this was a great thing that God did at this time in our lives. Sometimes we feel like it's dry. But there's different things that we need to look at when we're living at this time of in-between, the big things that we see that God is doing. Now, sometimes in the in-between, we need to be industrious. We need to be industrious in the in-between. Now, what does that mean? Well, honestly, to be industrious means that you're just getting down to the nitty-gritty and you're going to work, right? It's industry. Sometimes it just takes, hey, it's time to work. It's time to put the pedal to the metal. It's time to put your head down and dig a ditch. Right? I mean, no one wants to dig the ditch, but guess what? It's got to be done. Sometimes there's times in our lives when God is saying, you know what? It's not always fun. It's not always like, yes, I've promised you this, and I'm going to do these amazing things in your life. But at this moment in time, it's time to work. It's not that it's good. It's not that it's bad. It just is. It's time to put your head down and just grunt labor. One of the stories in the Bible that actually shows this is if we look at the story of Jacob. Now, Jacob he had some shenanigans go on with his brother Esau. So his dad said, listen, you got to get out of here. And I don't want you to marry any of the women from the land we're in now in Canaan. Right? So he's like, hey, I want you to go back and go see your mom's family. So he goes back and sees his mom's family, and God's told him, I'm gonna bless you. Right? And he's like, his dad's like, you are blessed. You have the blessing. You are gonna be the father of nations. So he goes back to his mom's family, and he sees the woman he wants, man, Rachel. It's like, bam, he sees Rachel and he's like, yes, that's the woman for me. Like, love at first sight. And he's like, this is the woman that is going to help me be the father of nations. And he's just feeling in his bones. And he's like, wow, God, the first woman I meet when I show up in this land is the woman that I know you have for me. He's like, God, you are blessing me. This is it. So he goes to see her father. Her dad's like, yeah, cool. Yeah, definitely. But if you want to marry her, you got to work for me for 7 years. And now in the scripture, it's only a couple of verses, but that's 7 years. Hey, this is the blessing that God has given me. This is the blessing that God has said he's going to pour out on my life. But before I can attain that, I got to head down and I got to work for 7 years. So what did he do? 7 years. 7 years of farming, ranch hand, shepherd, looking after his father-in-law's flock. The next thing you know, he says, what? 7 years is up. Let's do this. His father-in-law goes, no. The way we do it in our country is you got to I got to marry off my oldest child, and that's Leah. So, you got to marry her. I know you worked 7 years, but if anyone's got to get married in my house, it's got to be Rachel's sister. So what does Jacob do? He goes like, yeah, all right, man, I'll do this thing. But I still want to marry Rachel. So he says, another 7 years of work. Head down, grind. So Jacob does it. He knows that God has given him something great, but in the in-between, he's got to head down and grind it out. So he does another 7 years of labor, of just working. It's the in-between. He's like, hey, God, you gave me this blessing. And now you said I'm going to be the father to nations. And he's like, this is the woman. I can feel it in my bones. But God's like, no, man, you got to work it out. So he ended up working for 14 years for Laban. At the end of 14 years, he got his hand in marriage in Rachel. And then it says he worked another 7 years after that. Now in this time, he was working and he was learning. He was becoming an amazing shepherd. I mean, when it was time for him to leave, Laban's like, no, I don't want you to leave because everything you put your hand to is blessed. Your work is blessed because guess what? God blessed him in his work. Why? Because he put his head down and he did the work that was needed at that time. God is giving us skills and he's saying, you know what? It's all not going to be glorious, stuff like that. But there's a time in between when I need you to just put your head down and work and use those skills that I've given you. We see Jesus actually talk about this in Matthew 25. He's talking about, he gives the parable of the talents where the master gives all of his different servants talents. And some of them, while the master's gone, in that time of in between, they put their head down and they work and they invest the money and they work with the money and they turn it over and the master's like, yeah, that's what I'm asking for. But then there was the one guy, he's like, I'm just going to bury it. He didn't work. It was the time of in between where when the master came back and he's like, hey, did you work? Did you do your thing? And he came back, he's like, I didn't lose you any money, but you didn't work. In Matthew 25, verse 26, it says, his master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. You knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? He's like, dude, I told you. It's time for work. And I expected you to do something with it. So then he goes on and says, you ought to have invested my money with bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine with interest. So take the talent from him and give it, I've given to him, and give it to the guy with 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even that has been taken away. God said, hey, that time in between, I expect you to be working. I expect you to be doing something with the talents and abilities. He said, Jacob, you got 14 years of work here. And he did. And guess what? Because he worked, God blessed him. He ended up leaving Laban's house and going back to his father, a rich man. He had goats and sheep in abundance and a family and servants. He came back rich and wealthy because guess what? Yes, God's blessing him, but the time when it was time to work, head down and work. He was industrious in his time in the in-between. Now, sometimes in our in-between, it's going to be intolerable. I mean, the Bible's full of these times that, you know what, yeah, sometimes it's just hard work, not good, not bad. Sometimes it just sucks. Sometimes our in-between, and the Bible's full of these times where it's not fun. It's hard. I mean, the biggest story, the one that always comes to mind first would be Job. I mean, he had everything good. God was blessing him. And then before God blessed him again, while he knew that God was going to bless him again, it was hard. But for me, I look at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That they were there, and they were in a foreign land. And when Nebuchadnezzar was saying, hey, you guys got to bow down, they were waiting. They're like, God, we know you're going to bless. He did it in the past. When they were first taken, he fed them. When they were only being fed bread and water, they were big and strong. So like, yeah, God's doing these things. But guess what? They're waiting for that next miracle in between. It sucked because guess what? Nebuchadnezzar said, hey, everyone's going to bow down to this idol. And they're like, no, we're believing in God. And it sucked. But they knew that God was going to be with them. And it says in Daniel 3, verse 24 and 25, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 bound men into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th was like the son of the gods. In these times, in the in-between, when it seems like it's desolate and things aren't going your way, God's there with you. When it seems like you're in the fire and it's like, God, you've told me you're going to bless me. You've told me you're going to pour out into my life. Where are you? He's with you. In the in-between, when it seems like no one's there, God is with you. There's a 4th in that fire. Now, honestly, sometimes things are going to be good. Sometimes things are inspiring in the in-between. Yeah, you know what I mean? Sometimes things are really good because God's doing things. He may not be doing what we were looking forward to and like the end goal and the massive blessing. But guess what? When you put your head down and work sometimes things are good. And we need to enjoy these things and we need to, respect these things and say, yeah, sometimes God's working in the good. Sometimes when things are just good, it's inspiring to wake up in the morning and you're like, yeah, this is a good thing. God is working in it. Enjoy it. Relax in it. Have fun. When God wants to work in inspiring ways, and it's not the big, amazing miracles that sometimes we remember, sometimes things are just good. That reminds me of Paul. For one of my classes I'm doing for school, I'm going through the book of Ephesians. It's all about the time when Paul is in Ephesus. And then we look back in Acts where it talks about when Paul actually first goes to Ephesus. In Acts 19, 9 to 11, it says, "But when some became stubborn and continued in unbelief, speaking evil of the way before the congregation, he withdrew from them and took the disciples with him, reasoning daily in the hall of Tyrannus. This continued for 2 years, so that all the residents of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. And God was doing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul." So we look at 2 years of Paul here where, Paul did some amazing things. He had some amazing miracles. He was shipwrecked. He did this. He talked to some of the biggest people on the continent of that time. But in between these things, he went to Ephesus for a couple years and he just pastored and he worked, and God blessed him in that. There was a time of blessing. It wasn't the big things that we read about in the Bible, but guess what? Sometimes just putting your head down and going, "God, you're good, and I'm going to praise you." And that's what he did. He preached and he taught and he praised God for everything that was going on in his life, and God blessed him. All of Asia was able to hear the word of the Lord, was able to know the way, the truth, and the life. So sometimes things are just good. And we need to appreciate that and say, "God, thank you for this time in the in-between." And maybe rest in it and know that it's not always going to be this easy, right? But appreciate it and say, "God, thank you." Do your work in that and enjoy the good times that he has. So during these times of in-betweens, when we're living in this time, we need to stay focused. And so while we're living in the in-between, there's a couple things I want us to remember. Number one, most importantly, we need to have continued communication with God. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean just always praying and saying, "Thank you, God"? Yes. Praising God in these times, invaluable. We see that, at a time of in between when Paul and Silas were in prison, where they knew that they were doing God's work. But hey, this was a time when they knew God was going to do something great. He'd done something great in the past. Now they were in between that, going like, "Hey, what's happening here?" But guess what? They praised God in that prison cell. They sang praises to him. They continued in that time. Sometimes it's venting. Communicating with God isn't all just like, "Yay, you're awesome, God." Sometimes it's, "You're awesome, God, but dude, are you serious right now?" There's whole books. There's whole chapters in Psalms of Lamentations, where David, where other writers are just crying out to God and venting to God like, "God, I thought you were with me in this." There are times about when they're in the in-betweens going, "God, you've done great things in the past. I know you're going to do great things in the future, but come on, where are you right now?" There's nothing wrong with crying out to God and saying, "Things aren't like they're supposed to be." And God's going to answer you back and go, "They are. Because I'm in the midst of this." Communicate with God, whether it be praising or venting, and most importantly, listening. When we communicate with God, there's Nothing more important than just listening and waiting, because for all we know, he's trying to tell us, time of waiting is over. The journey is just about to end, because we're getting to that point right now where I'm going to pour out a blessing like you've never seen. But maybe we don't know that because we haven't taken the time to sit and listen. A big part of communication we always forget about is the listening part. We love the talking part. We love the saying our piece part. Look at Facebook and Twitter and all social media. We like to say our piece. But it's so important when we're communicating with God that we take that time to listen and to know what God is saying to us so he can direct us in this time. Another important thing that we need to look at doing when we're in these times of in between is looking for opportunities to learn. As we already said with Jacob, but with so many others in the Bible, it's a time of learning. God is sharpening you. God is teaching you things that you're going to need, that he's going to need you to know and to use in times that are coming up. He's preparing you. He's molding you into what he has, what he wants you to be. Take these times and go, God, what do you want me to learn? And when you learn them, put your head down and just do your best. Don't worry about God, what am I gonna do with this? God, what are the big miracles you're gonna do? Instead, just take it and go, I know you want me to learn this, God. Put your head down and learn it. Work hard, become the best. Jacob became one of the best shepherds. He understood how to make sheep and goats, reproduce with stripes and dots and whatnot. These are things that, read that story. It's actually crazy in Genesis, how he took bark and the animals seeing the stripes ended up creating, striped and spotted animals. But because he was a farmer, because he was a shepherd, he put his head down and he worked for 20 years. He knew these animals, and God was able to use that and increase him and do a miracle in his life. What is it that God is wanting you to just sit down and learn and work and become the best you can possibly be at, so that he can use that to do that big miracle that you look back on in life and go, wow, look at this thing that God did. What is it that God wants you to learn in this time of the in-between? And most importantly, never forget that God is working. He's working behind the scenes when you can't see it, when you don't understand it, when you think nothing's happening, when you feel like you're in a dry desert land, when you feel like you're the children of Israel, when you've left Egypt and you're in between and you're waiting to get to the promised land and you're like, God, what is happening in the in-between right now? God is working. There are so many things that he taught the children of Israel during those 40 years in the desert. He gave them the 10 commandments, the basis of all law. Know that God is working. He's preparing things. He's moving behind the scenes that you don't understand. If you can keep your mind focused on that, God, he's true to his word. He's true to his promise. He will continue to be with you and bless you. I'm praying that God is working. This was a talk for me because I go through times where I'm like, God, what is it? Especially during this time of COVID, we're like, God, what are you doing? We seem like we're not going anywhere. We're not going forward. We're not going back. We're in a time of in between right now, and God's asking you, what are you going to do with this time of in between? Maybe there's something that God's like, I need you to put your head down and work. I need you to get better at this skill. I've given you this time off, this time away to put your head down and work and know this skill. Maybe it's time to spend with your family. God is working at something. Maybe he's like, you're not ready for this yet. I need you to just sit and chill and do what you're doing, but know that I'm in the midst. There's so many of us who feel like we're in this time of in-between. We're living in this time of in-between. Know that God's at work. He's at work in your life. He's at work in our church. He's at work in our families, in everything that we do. God is moving. If we just stop and look and wait and know that God, you have a plan, you have a purpose. I pray that God continues to move in your life. If you need any more information, if you'd like to speak to me or anyone here at the church, you can get a hold of us through Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. Put a message below. I'd love to start a conversation with you. We read every comment or whatnot that is put down, and we would love to hear from you. I pray that God opens up his heart to you and that you can know the things that God has planned for you, because they're good things. He has plans for us to prosper and do well. I pray that God continues to bless you as he has blessed myself and my family. I hope you have a fantastic week. God bless.